I think it's fair to say that the preparations for the war really go back probably a bit over 2 decades from my understanding, where Iran began to send a large amount of aid to build tunnels, to build infrastructure, to build um, um, military capabilities to resist an onslaught. And these were not used during the wars, even the more recent ones. If you recall, 2, 3 years ago, Islamic Jihad had a brief war with the Israelis, and Hamas didn't get involved. And a lot of people were wondering why Hamas is not helping in Islamic Jihad. But the reason was because it was uh, still too early. They were completing the networks. Islamic Jihad knew this, Hamas knew this, everyone, people on the outside were raising questions, but those in the know, they knew that it was not the time for Hamas to get involved. And Islamic Jihad knew that too. Simultaneously, the creation of a resistance capabilities in Yemen and in Hezbollah were being strengthened. So they were working on multiple fronts at the same time. Now, October the 7th was not decided in Tehran. It was the local commanders who chose when. I personally think that it was, I don't know about the day in particular, but I think that the war in Ukraine probably was a factor in that the West was deeply focused elsewhere, as it was sending resources in large amounts to Ukraine, and it would have been difficult for it to focus completely on destroying the resistance. So they decided to carry out that operation. But again, I don't have information from behind closed doors, but the plan all along was for the Axis to support Hamas and its allies, Islamic Jihad, and the other smaller groups. There are a number of groups that are involved, but they're not very well known. So, and also the West Bank. The West Bank is a part of this. This is something that is not really appreciated, but a large amount of weapons and other things most probably go from Syria to Jordan into the West Bank. And that's been a big source of contention between the Jordanians and the Syrians and the Iranians. But so I think that this was planned. It came at a heavy price because you can imagine what exists underground in Lebanon and in Gaza and in Yemen. The reason why the Americans have failed to destroy Yemeni capabilities in the Red Sea, Ansarullah's capabilities, is because they're basically underground. The whole focus, I think, or the whole strategy is based upon weakening the capability of the Air Force to wipe out the resistance. And so moving underground weakened the capability of the Air Force. Now, in the case of Beirut, I think it's a bit different because Beirut there's water under the sea. The tunnels can't go that deep. And also Beirut is a city that has been very deeply infiltrated since before I was born, since the PLO. If you even go and watch old movies or old novels, intrigue and espionage and so on, Beirut was always a center. And Western embassies, NGOs, these Western NGOs, I'm not saying everyone in them are bad, but the Western NGOs are there to basically, they have an agenda. And many Western journalists and so on. So Beirut has always been the weakest link, but the resistance tunnels across Lebanon, they're very much in place and they're prepared for battle. So it was very costly, but at the same time, the resistance, while they are coordinated both in Gaza, West Bank, Yemen, Lebanon, Syria and Iraq and Iran, but the resistance, one key element is they want to make sure that the global South and non-Western countries are on board. So it is not in the interest of the resistance to allow for a regional war, because if there is a regional war and the resistance is blamed for it, then our relationship with countries like Russia and China and others could become problematic. And the Americans are very good at flipping the tables and turning things around and making the victim, as Max so brilliantly showed us. They're very good at this. So it is important for countries across the world not to see the resistance as being the side that initiates a regional conflict. Because if there is a regional conflict, then that could mean the end of oil and gas exports.
How do you see the trajectory after what transpired the past couple of weeks?
Well, I think you probably know this better than I, but there is a paradox, because on the one hand, Iran has to escalate. Well, Iran didn't escalate. Iran has to respond to escalation. And at the same time, we don't want a regional war, or at least we don't want to be blamed for a regional war. So that balancing act is very difficult. In April, when Iran first struck, back then I told people in media, but I think they didn't appreciate what was going on. Iran wanted to create deterrence, but it was mostly an intelligence gathering operation. And that Iran forced the Israelis, but mostly the Americans, to fire what they had at these very cheap drones and some missiles, mostly older missiles. And so Iran, it costed them, but more importantly, Iran was able to figure out what sort of capabilities they have. And so this time around, that's why almost all the missiles got through. And I actually don't think that those 10% or so of missiles that were intercepted, I'm not sure whether all of them were intercepted or a few of them may have broken as they were coming down, they broke apart, because most of these missiles are also older missiles. They're not the oldest, but they're more advanced. But there were none of the hypersonic missiles were fired, none of the new generation missiles were. But I think the answer to your question, we're getting very close to the answer. I don't know the answer, but if the Israelis strike Iran, then I think we are going to get into a very different situation potentially, because Iran has already said last week when it fired those missiles at Israel that next time around, if the Israelis respond, they're going to hit back much harder.
Yeah.
And that could take us anywhere.
Always.
I have a lot of questions, but I wanted to let some of the audience members jump in here. If there's any questions, this is from the students or from the faculty members here in attendance. Let's hear from you all, how your reaction to the film, any questions for the panelists here.
But
yeah,
just one thing. For me, there was really nothing new in the film, because the Grayzone has been pursuing this for a whole year. And I really advise you to regularly go to the website, both watch the YouTube videos and the articles. If you're regular viewers of Max's work and the work of his colleagues, you would already know all this. And it's very important for people like yourselves to be equipped with it, because right now it's your generation that's going to be the people who, I think, determine the fate of public opinion. If you know what you're talking about, you may know that what is right and what is wrong, but if you can't articulate it, you're not going to be able to have an impact. So I really encourage you to use the work of Max, and also he very very rightly pointed out to the Electronic Intifada, which also does very excellent work. Sorry.
maybe we can come back to, advising. We live in a very dubious digital age. We have a lot of, so I would also, while we get questions, I'd like the panelists to kind of think through how to advise students to, cut through the bullshit, as they say, and really see truth and analyze the news and what's going on in a more poignant fashion. So let's get some. There's one. Simon. There's one over there in the middle. In the middle, right there. And there's the professor here at the front also.
I
Go
guess
ahead.
it's working. Thank you all for the panel. I figured that this panel is going to take place today, like yesterday. I didn't know that it had been taking place for 3 days, and I feel very privileged to be able to listen to you all in person. I have actually 2 questions. First one is for Mr. Max Blumenthal. So he mentioned in the beginning of his speech that this thing kind of sparked in 2014, and that he wasn't really surprised, or he wasn't really shocked, because he was expecting the volcano to kind of explode. And what really interests me, especially in the US politics, is that, as he mentioned also in the speech, everything has changed, and the whole politics narrative and the understanding of the US media and the public has changed. So I'm wondering if Israel sort of use this opportunity right before the US elections, as it's going to take place in like November 5. Does he think that it has any links to it? Because they could do it in any other time, but they chose 2023 as the whole world was focusing on UK. There were other speculations and talks about still like a new pandemic and everything, but they changed it in a matter of time. So do you think that it has any other links? Before I jump into it, would you like me to ask the second question, or would you like to first answer?
Just house
All
rules.
5 questions.
Max, just house rules. So if we can keep this fast moving, so panelists also, if you could keep your comments brief, we can get as many questions, and then we don't have to couple them together, and we can have a more natural conversation. So the questioners, if you could keep your questions brief, comments brief, we can go in a fast-paced manner and try to get as many people involved in the conversation as possible. So if you want to ask your second question, and then
It's
Max, yeah.
It's for the whole panel. I mean, any of you can answer. I'm wondering, what would you advise us to do in the aftermath of this? I mean, this genocide is going to end after all, and what would it be the best things that we as students and the builders of the next generation can do? Because it's going to be our responsibility to build back Gaza and
Great.
the whole rest of the world. Thank you.
Yeah, Max, go ahead.
You mentioned 2023. When Israel is doing something, I don't know if I understand, to affect the US election. What it would.
Do you think that it has any other links to, I don't know, that they would, make the US support them more in this kind of election?
I think she means like, what's Netanyahu? You mean like Netanyahu being behind this attack and?
Trying to induce Trump election.
Yeah.
Well, Joe Biden, you can never really understand what he says, and therefore it's hard to understand what he means. But he kind of rambled some comments out about Netanyahu. Is he interfering in the US election? He just put the question out there, and then he was like, I don't know. You know how he trails off and he says anyway? And it's almost that he does that when he realizes he's going off script and saying something he shouldn't say. It's very clear Netanyahu is interfering in US politics because he thinks he's the president of the United States. He thinks he's the king of the United States. Look at his reception in Congress, where he was given more standing ovations, 60, than any 79, all right, than any US president ever gets. He has a clear interest in seeing Donald Trump be elected. Why? Look at what Donald Trump did yesterday, a major event with Miriam Adelson, and then honoring the Chabad Lubavitch cult leader, Menachem Schneerson, who is portrayed as the Moshiach or Messiah of this ultra-Orthodox cult, which is very closely tied to many of Netanyahu's coalition partners and the settlers in the West Bank. Miriam Adelson is everywhere with Trump. She has promised him $100 million. She is the widow of the late casino baron Sheldon Adelson, who helped fund Benjamin Netanyahu's career and owned one of the largest papers in Israel, which was a pro-Netanyahu paper called Israel Hayom. So Netanyahu thinks that the longer this war goes on, the more it hurts Biden, especially in places like Michigan, where there are many Arab Americans. Lebanese Americans, I think, are the highest percentage of Arab Americans in Michigan, and now Lebanon is under naval siege. So Netanyahu wants Michigan to flip for Trump. And it's obvious to the Democrats. And what have they done to stop him? Nothing. They got Zio-cucked. That's what I call it. It's pathetic. They're letting themselves lose to a foreign country. They talked about Russia, Russia, Russia. All roads lead to Russia. It's obvious all roads lead to Tel Aviv here if Kamala Harris loses. And they think that they have to bend over backwards for Netanyahu. So he's in the perfect position, but he clearly wants Trump. And I think this was, just in closing, will be a mistake for Netanyahu because he will face more opposition from Congress if he is seen as too much of a Republican partisan and too closely linked to a hated figure like Trump, who's hated by the national security bureaucracy. And so paradoxically, while Trump promises to destroy Iran's cities, it may actually be harder for him to accomplish Netanyahu's goals than a Democrat.
Thank you. I'm gonna table the second question for reflections at the end. So we'll come back to your second question. We had a question in the front. Yeah, the Professor Irfan in the front, who is, we're honored to have him here with us.
Thank you. First, I want to make a short comment and then a question. It seems like, Max, it is a wonderful film. It is a major document of our time, so that those who really want to see truth, they have it. So congratulations on that. I just thought about comments made by Max and then François. So on the one hand, François' comment, and I'm only going to make it even more aggravate, that things have not changed from the European situation, you know? Max is more optimistic, especially about the younger generation, that there is optimism. François doesn't have that kind of optimism. And to complicate things even further, if you see from the Indian side, you have ex-army officer staging a demonstration in front of Israeli embassy, saying that why Israel is not allowing us to go and fight on behalf of Israel against Palestinians. Okay? So the only democracy in the Middle East, as quote unquote, and now India brands itself as not simply the world's largest democracy, but the mother of democracy. Now that army officer was interviewed and he is saying that, look, the reason we want to fight on behalf of Israel is that Israel is the only country which can eliminate the source of terrorism, which is 56 Muslim countries. And India is also facing the same threat, you know? So it is not so much, I mean, it is to some extent pro-Israel, but it is also anti-Islamic, right? So if we see it from that perspective, there is it seems to be there is very little space for hope, because it is not just limited to Middle East, Europe, and America, but also South Asia. And yet, we as humans, we need some kind of optimism to really live a more ethical life. So I would just like two of you to actually talk to each other and see what could be the way out of this structural reality on the one hand, which is so entrenched, and it is hardly in favor of justice. And yet, we need some kind of ethical hope to continue to resist, to continue to work towards a more dignified and justice-oriented, not simply the Middle East, but the world at large. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Professor Irfan, for your comments and question. Anybody want to jump in here and take a stab at the structural? I think Francois, you.
Perhaps I can handle the microphone. Well, I mean, I think the question here is about the transformation of geopolitical realities in the region and across the world. And certainly the United States has been trying to co-opt India for a long time now. And with the ascendance of Modi, Netanyahu also is trying the same thing. And we've seen lots of cooperation in the past, at least decade, between India and Israel in many facets, particularly in the arms industry, intelligence, the Quad. Whether that's going to translate into more regional or global alignment remains to be seen. Certainly what's going on in Kashmir and what's going on in Palestine, there are a lot of resemblance there, a lot of tactics that have been adopted by India when it comes to Kashmir, particularly in the areas of settlement and the militarization of society. That's clear. Now you have another complication which comes to economics as well. With BRICS, India being a member of BRICS, that will put some constraint also on how far it would go in that direction. I was talking to Pepe the other day, and certainly there are forces within India that is not happy with this arrangement. So I think the jury is not out yet where India is going to be. There's a lot of forces within the governing party to try to pull it in one direction. There are other forces within India. Some of them are economic forces who are not happy with this. But I think the United States is trying its best in its confrontation with China to pull India in that direction, and they have been more successful than not. How China, and of course there is rivalry also between China and India, so there's another element there, even though they're members of BRICS. So just to give this is just a reflection. I don't think we can predict where India is going to be, let's say 10 years from now. That depends on internal as well as external factors. I want to take this opportunity, since Dr. Osman was outside the room, I wanted him to pitch in about South Africa. You come from South Africa, and you've seen the progress when it came to South Africa, how South Africa got involved into the National Court of Justice, and how there has been a huge push from Zionists, not just in South Africa, but also across the globe, trying to save Israel. I think Israel has been before the court in a very, very awkward. They've never faced these kind of accusations. They really effectively had no defense whatsoever. I think if it is left to the courts, not only will they be convicted as a genocidal regime, but also the leaders, it's Netanyahu or Gallant, which I was very surprised for Karim Khan actually to ask for their indictment. That if it wasn't for this huge push going on, I think they would have been indicted. They would have been certainly arrest warrants would have been. Tell us from South African's perspective, where you see it up close, how far is the Zionist lobby in South Africa trying to push in that direction? We saw for the first time that even the ruling government has changed. Does that have to do anything with Gaza, or this is just a circumstance?
There's no doubt that there's a parallel between South Africa in our struggle, anti-colonial struggle, and Palestine. Mandela himself was trained in Algeria. The PLO and the ANC go very deep in the struggle against both apartheid regimes. So the ties of the ruling government with the Palestinians is very strong. However, during the apartheid years, and I was watching Max's documentary very intensely, because South Africa was also very involved in trying to sell apartheid. There's a book called Selling Apartheid by Ron Nixon, in which $100 million was spent. So we come from that background of trying to defend, pre-apartheid years, selling apartheid as Israel is doing now, which your documentary really thoroughly exposes. However, in the last 30 years, we expected more from South Africa, given our own experiences. We still, although we've withdrawn our ambassador to Tel Aviv, we still have the embassy functioning there. On the 7th of October, the Zionist movement had a very strong commemoration in support of the victims of the attack in Israel, and they do it quite thoroughly. So we have a very strong Zionist lobby in South Africa, really pressurizing South Africa. And of course, the government of national unity has changed. The ANC has changed. We've got a new government. We have ministers now, and they do soft power very well, especially with drip irrigation and trying to sell their products in South Africa to change their attitudes. And our Minister of Agriculture is very pro-Zionist. He went to Ukraine to support the Ukrainians against the Russian invasion. He had refused to go to refused to condemn Palestine at all. So we're going under a spirit of flux at the moment. Our former minister was very strong, and our DG was very strong. They pushed with the ICG case. There have been death threats issued. The current minister, he was the previous Minister of Justice, Lamola, at the moment, very strong. So there is fortunately continuity there, that we will find the case against the ICJ, despite the pressure on South Africa, will continue. And he said so publicly. Surprisingly, our president is very strong as well. So that part of it is strong despite the pressure of the government of national unity. So to be quick, yes, I think we will continue in our ICJ case. It is the only non-Muslim country that has done. It's given us kudos in the world in spite of the pressure, and we're very proud of that fact.
Yeah, so we're going to get some more questions. I want to respond to Professor Irfan's comment about India. I see this situation very pessimistically. So when I read Project 2025, which is this 900-page document that's floating around, it's very clear to me that the Republican strategists who put that together really see India as they're dreaming of recreating the British Raj, right? A kind of partner in the Indian Ocean from which they will then again extend influence into Asia. And unfortunately, I feel like the current government in India is lending itself and actually volunteering. It's the ironies of history that one of the largest anti-colonial movements to have freed themselves from British occupation is now lending itself to imperial power and sees itself, I think, dreams about seeing itself as some kind of imperial player now. And it's not that different from the Democrats as well. So India has become this node, both for the Indo-Pacific strategy and also now the new Western Asian strategy or Middle Eastern strategy from the American perspective. You see the continuous, pictures of these corridors that are being drawn by Netanyahu, right? And it's always like from India to UAE and then through Saudi Arabia, and then ends up in Tel Aviv. I don't know what that means exactly.
So it's India, Middle East,
Yeah.
Europe, economic.
Israel, India, Middle East, especially Emirates, Israel, and all the way to Europe. It's called IMAC.
IMAX. So this corridor is the, I think, an inverse alternative path into Eurasia for the Imperial
It's against
resurgence.
the road and belt.
It's against the
Yeah.
Chinese New Civil War.
So India is, I don't think that it's in a tussle. I think, quite frankly, India sees its self-interest in partnering with an alternative Eurasian kind of structure to give Europe a leeway into Asia. So it's dreaming of being another British Raj, I see, like, a neo British Raj. Anyways, let's take some questions. Let's get Saima in the front, and then we'll have the gentleman there. There's one up there. Saima, and again, house rules.
I'll
House
keep it
rules.
very brief. Okay, my question is for Dr. Marandi. I hope I did not mispronounce your name. Recently, Iran has been hailed as a new hero in the Middle East by facilitating resistance groups like Hezbollah or Hamas. But the impact has been very, very limited, or that's how we can see or how we can translate it. Can you explain what exactly is Iran's intention in the whole issue? Because they facilitated Hamas, or that's what we were told, but that ended up in a lot of killings in Palestine. They supported Hezbollah, but that kind of gave Israel a window to get into Lebanon. Can you please explain what exactly is Iran doing?
Well, if you go back to the revolution itself in 1979, before the revolution, the revolutionaries who were close to Ayatollah Khomeini or Imam Khomeini, one of their two key, well, there are three, I say two, but there are really three key foreign policy issues that were pursued, and because of them, they were attacking the foreign policy of the Shah. One was Iran's dependence on the West. The second was on regarding apartheid South Africa and Iran's relationship with the regime. And the third was Israel. So when the revolution took place, immediately they shut down the Israeli embassy. It wasn't an embassy, but it was effectively an embassy. And they shut down the South African embassy. So it is ideological. It goes back well before the revolution itself. Of course, back then there was no Hamas, there was no Hezbollah, there was no Islamic Jihad. But since the Iranian position has been that Israel is illegitimate, and the same with South Africa, Iran gradually for a host of reasons which we don't have time to get into, but afterwards I can explain further. The gap between Iran and the PLO grew, and I think Oslo, the war in Iraq, which led to the peace negotiations in Madrid, and then Oslo, all of these created a big schism between Iran and the PLO, and Iran began to more heavily support Islamic Jihad and Hamas. And of course, in Lebanon, the creation of Hezbollah actually was a result of the 1982 invasion of Lebanon, which I know that Hamas and Hezbollah today are under a lot of pressure, but the Israelis were able to get to Beirut in 3 days or 4 days. How many days did it take for them to get to Beirut? 4 days or 3 days? In 1982.
It was June 6th when they invaded.
And they reached Beirut on June 9th or 10th. Yeah, so roughly, so you can imagine how, by the way, how things are different despite the horrors of the Israeli onslaught. It's not like what it was before, where they basically wiped out the PLO and surrounded Beirut and took Beirut, and then we saw the Sabra Shatila massacres, and the PLO left, of course, uh, Lebanon. So Iran's support for Hezbollah and Hamas and jihad continued, and it is ideological. I there's sort of a link between the question the young lady raised earlier, if I understood correctly, about who benefits from this war. Did Yahya Sinwar and those who made the decision to attack, did they make the right decision, or were they influenced by the Israelis? I uh, I I think that Hamas had no option ultimately to attack. You may say, well, there's this, the devastation and the horrors that we've seen over the last year uh, make it very difficult to see victory here. But the Israelis will ultimately, if the trend continues or continued, they will expel Palestinians from the West Bank. They will expel them from uh, Al-Quds or East Jerusalem, and it's inevitable for Gaza to be uh, the existence of Palestinians there uh, to um, to continue. Of course, the decision was made by Hamas. They made the decision, but Iran felt obliged that regardless of whether it was right or wrong, and I think ultimately Hamas had no option, whether it was then or 10 days later, 10 months later. But Iran felt that it had the obligation to support them. And it's very, financially, it's very costly. Politically, it's very costly. All of the sanctions on Iran are because of Palestine. It has nothing to do with anything else. The nuclear program or human rights or global warming or whatever they'd like to, pin on Iran. It's all about Palestine. It's always been about Palestine. And the financial costs, of course, the sanctions, all of this carry a toll. They impose a lot on the Iranian people, and some people find this too much. But the struggle, and if you look at what happened in Algeria, um, they lost, according to some estimates, up to 2 million people in the resistance struggle. If you look at it from that perspective, if one refrains from asserting independence because the occupier is going to inflict a heavy price upon you, then I think resistance really has to be set aside altogether. So I think we have to support Hamas, regardless of what we may think. I support Hamas, and I think that their assault was inevitable. Um, I recall when Pierce Morgan, every time someone would come on a show and say, "Do you condemn Hamas?" I think I was probably the first person who went on to say, I said, "No, of course I don't. It is a legitimate act of resistance." Maybe, as Max pointed out, maybe there were atrocities, maybe some of the Hamas soldiers, but that's not what the design was. And it wasn't any of the claims that they made. Maybe a few soldiers here who, people they've lived under occupation all their life. I'm talking too long. Whenever I should stop, let me know. These people were born under occupation. Max, I think, was in Gaza during one of the wars. He saw firsthand, every now and then they would slaughter people in Gaza, strangle people in Gaza. These people were not living under normal circumstances. So if some of them went too far, yes, of course, it's condemnable. If anyone goes too far, it's condemnable. But the act itself shouldn't be, uh, you know, um, delegitimize. It's in my opinion, a fully legitimate act of defense, and we should not let those narratives that some people are now saying. I've heard people start to say maybe Yahya Sinwar is actually a traitor, and that this is, I think, all absolute nonsense. And when things get tough, people start to question. When things get bad, people start to question. But I think we have to focus on defending Gaza, defending the resistance, defending Lebanon, defending the West Bank, which we don't hear in the news that much. And we shouldn't lose hope even for a second. It was inevitable when this started that the Israelis were going to do this. I think it was clear. But if you don't do it, you're going to lose anyway.
Thank you so much. We had some questions back there.
Hi, I would like to ask about is it Iran intention in supporting the Palestinian is really about the Palestinian cause, or is it trying to pursue the agenda of Shia Crescent? Because we see that agenda of what? Shia Crescent, Hilal Shia. Because we see that Windows October 7 is becoming give the windows of opportunity for even the Israel to pursue the greater Israel idea, the regional grand design, and also maybe Iran also is pursuing the same, is competing the grand design of the Middle East region, the Shia Crescent region. Thank you.
Let me make something very clear. I think people do not appreciate the amount of suffering Iranians have experienced because of Palestine. We have for decades faced maximum pressure sanctions. If you want to send me $1 to Iran, it is impossible. If I want to buy Max Blumenthal's book, it's impossible. I cannot use the banking system. People die because certain medicines or their raw materials are not purchasable. So factories, like, they make medicine in Iran, and then suddenly the raw materials not there, then there's a shortage of certain medicines and people die. And sometimes people protest. 2-3 years ago, when we had the protests and riots in Iran, it wasn't about Mahsa Amini. It actually came out that she wasn't beaten. The autopsy didn't show. It was about people, young people, a lot of young people who are just tired. There are, fewer jobs, life is difficult, and then you're constantly being told by the Persian media that's beaming in from the West. We have hundreds of media anti-Iran beaming. There are more anti-Iranian Persian media. There's more anti-Iranian Persian media than media inside Iran. And they're constantly telling you that your money is going to Gaza, your money is going to these people who are billionaires,
Living in Qatar.
Living in Qatar,
In luxury apartment.
in luxury, like even now, the martyr Ismail Haniyeh, they're saying he's a billionaire. He lost almost all of his family in Gaza, but they build this narrative that Ismail Haniyeh is a multi-billionaire. Nonsense. But the point is that they do that to Iran. So they strangle Iran on the one hand, they make ordinary people suffer, and Iran does pay a heavy price. I mean, imagine how much money Iran has invested in the tunnels and in the weapons in Gaza, in Lebanon, in Yemen, and elsewhere. So, and if Iran wanted to propagate itself, all those billions of dollars, that could have been much more effective to do for some. And that the whole notion of this Shia crescent comes from King Abdullah of Jordan. I don't think we really need to explain too much about his role in all this. So, no, I think that Iran has always been very sincere. I've never done anything important, but if I did not believe in how sincere Iran was, I personally would not do some of the things that I do. Like going to Dahiya or wherever and so on. Why would I want to do that for a state that is highly hypocritical or has some hidden agenda? I think what Iran has done, what Hezbollah has done, what Ansarullah has done, what Hamas has done, what Islamic Jihad have done, is truly heroic. But what we need to do is get more people to join the resistance and to push governments and to push civil society to not to necessarily fight, but to put pressure on the enemy, whether it's through media, whether it's through boycotting, and I'm not talking about, boycotting Israel. That's, I think, a given. I think all Western companies, they should all be boycotted, even if you have a very small impact, that's an impact. Even if you have no impact, it should be, it doesn't matter if you actually have success. The point is you actually try to do something, even if it's not success. Someone like Max and my dear colleagues here, they all have an impact. Maybe I have no impact, but I still have a responsibility to do something. It's the intention that's important. But I'm optimistic, by the way, just going back to, because I said a sentence that may have been ambivalent. I said they would have been defeated anyway or something like that. I don't believe that the Israeli regime will have the upper hand. I wouldn't be discouraged, because there's a lot of discouragement right now. People are very depressed. Just today, we were speaking about how, because they were asking me, will Hezbollah be able to resist all this? It's going to be very bloody and very tough and very painful, and it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better. But I am optimistic about the future, and we should all remain optimistic. And we believe in something higher. So God is with the oppressed, and ultimately the oppressed have risen up for their dignity and rights. And I think that it's inevitable that they'll achieve victory.
Thank you. Right here, again, let's try to keep it house rules, brief, quick.
Thank you. I certainly subscribe to the view about India being a part of the axis of oppression. And they have been doing the same thing, because I am from Kashmir. They're doing the same thing in Kashmir, what Israel is doing. And this picture, which we saw documentary today, we have seen it happen in Kashmir with a more time. That means this has been in a particular period of time, or 1 month, 2 months. In our place, it has been for years happening. Number one. Number two is that, this is a question for Max, because the latest speech by Trump, I don't know whether you have heard it, that he has made a very long speech today. And he has said that, I will quote, give you some, Joe Biden does not run the country. Kamala Harris doesn't run the country. It is someone else at the back who runs our country. It is called the enemy within. Russia, China, Iran, no one can damage USA than the enemy within our country. The enemy within our country is more dangerous than all the countries against USA. Some analysts say that Trump, is not dependable on what he will speak next. So some analysts say that, does he mean that the Zionists are running, which we know they are running USA? Whether he will dismantle them. That's why lately it is said, some analysts say that Israel does not support Trump.
Well, you wish, buddy. I don't think so. Trump would be denouncing his own son-in-law, Jared Kushner, who's at the center of this entire IMEC program that we've been talking about. So I doubt it. And you never know what he means. He could mean that he could be referring to one of the weakest groups in the United States, the migrants whose countries were destroyed and who were given quote unquote parole or temporary protective status to basically encourage them to come to the US from Venezuela and Nicaragua, who Trump says are infecting the pure blood of America. Oh, sorry? Oh, Antifa. Yeah, Antifa. He could be talking also about the deep state, which they did wiretap Trump Tower. They did send an FBI, CIA operative into the Trump campaign in 2016 named Stefan Halper. The FBI ran an operation against Trump, Operation Crossfire Hurricane. John Brennan, former CIA chief, called Trump a traitor on national TV. The penalty for treason in the US is death. Now he's facing these weird assassination attempts. So he could be referring to powerful elites too. Trump is expressing a sentiment that I would say the vast majority of Americans who are engaged in politics agree with, but they all see different enemies within. And Russia is a proxy for many liberal Democrats for the enemy they see within, which is MAGA. They see MAGA and Putin as indistinguishable. Putin, by the way, has said that he doesn't care who's president in the United States. They're all controlled by the same bureaucracy, permanent national security architecture that Trump would call the deep state. And I would want to ask Pepe Escobar, since he understands the Russian thinking a little bit better than I do. Putin actually kind of endorsed Kamala Harris. I don't know if it was a joke.
Was trolling.
He was trolling, but
taken literally by the Americans.
But other Russian analysts I asked in 2016, I said, who does Russia really want to win? And they said, you think it's Trump because he says he wants to negotiate with Putin, but actually they think Hillary is more predictable and they can base their strategic decisions more on a democratic victory. So from the Russian point of view, not that you are representative of the Russian state, but you know the thinking, you're closer to it. Who would they prefer? Well, they say Mohammed is IRGC.
I am a functional KGB agent, so yes, I'll answer the question. A serious problem in Russia is that when we start talking seriously about Gaza, Palestine, and West Asia, the first thing they say could be a diplomat, could be a businessman, or somebody related to the agencies, the security agencies. But this is not our war, which is absolutely factually correct. They have an existential war on their borders, where they have the full force of the collective West against Russia. And not only they are defeating the full force of the collective West, they are winning, and their economy is winning, and their soft power globally is winning. It's true. Their relation to Gaza, Palestine, and the axis of resistance, it's much more nuanced and complex for several reasons. One of them, the Zionist lobby in Moscow is extremely powerful. That's very, very serious. And it's not only on a geopolitical level. I'm talking about the banking and the financial system. Some of the top oligarchs, they have tentacular interests that include Israel and are directly linked to the way the international financial system works.
And they have Israeli passports.
And
like Berezovsky.
Excellent point, Max. All of them have double passports. From Abramovich to Friedman, the owner of Alpha Bank, which was in Israel when October 7 happened. 2 or 3 days later, he was spotted at the airport with his Russian passport coming back to Russia. And whenever I ask this question, why nothing happened to Friedman? The answer is always yes. He's a bit too powerful. And the Putin game with the oligarchs is something, it's a Russian ballet, in fact. He has to compose with them. He cannot frontally antagonize them. And there's one simple condition. Okay, bring all the money that you have internationally or international financial system, your investments in the West, bring it here and invest in the Russian economy. Then you can do anything you want. And they got the message, which also explains why the Russian economy is booming, because all the money that was in the West now is repatriated to Russia. And that explains why the ruble is strong as well. There's no unemployment, you name it. But the relationship of Russia, China, and now we're getting to BRICS again. The relationship with Gaza, Palestine, and West Asia, it's something that Russia, China, they act in concert. in several levels. It's very, very complex because it's part of what they define as comprehensive strategic partnership. So they lobbied hard to have the new members of BRICS, with several differences, of course. In the case of Iran, I was discussing this with Professor Marandi, and he told me something that I didn't know, and it's really groundbreaking, that it was not China that was pushing to get Iran into BRICS, it was mostly India. That explains from a geo-economic point of view, because of the international north-south transportation corridor, where we have Russia, Iran, and India as the main partners. That explains it, but not everything, because when we have inside BRICS or the Shanghai Cooperation Organization rifts between India and China, and this is on every level, who's the mediator? Russia, always, because both India and China, and both personally, Xi and Modi, they listen to Putin and they respect Putin a lot. So it's very, very complicated, but I'll give you a few practical examples. The Beijing Declaration. 14 Palestinian factions go to Beijing. They are in front of Wang Yi, Chinese foreign minister. They sign the Beijing Declaration and they commit to Palestinian unity. This was broken by the Chinese, so the Chinese got a pledge from all of them, including Ismail Haniyeh in person. What happened a few days later? Ismail Haniyeh is assassinated. From the point of view of the Asian concept of loss of face and diplomatic disrespect, this is beyond, you cannot even imagine how serious it is. And the Chinese, they took this, they didn't say a word about it. It's the Chinese way. There will be consequences for Israel about this later on. This is extremely serious.
I need to ask you a question.
Yes.
Because you said from the Russian perspective, they have no dog in the fight. But if the resistance loses, geopolitically, Russia is going to lose huge in this region.
Excellent point, Sami. They understand that as well. So their answer, in fact, is twofold. It's not our war, but we're paying a lot of attention to that, which is true. And this is something that if you analyze what the Russian foreign ministry, who is extremely competent, is saying, and they're incrementally saying, and they are condemning Israel. Not only Nebenzia, their representative at the UN, but the foreign ministry and even Putin himself. What's happening in Lebanon for them is they compare it to what's happening in Gaza. They don't use for instance, in Russian media, they don't use the word genocide ever, because of all these constraints. 1.5 million Russians living in Israel with double passports.
Well, I mean, I saw also the Russian ambassador to the UN. He had the strongest position whatsoever of all the members.
Exactly.
So that is a reflection of policy? It has to be.
Yes, of course, it's a reflection of policy. They know that if the axis of resistance loses across the board, Russia, China, and BRICS lose as well, because they see these forever wars in different scenarios and different locations as a war against BRICS. This is the China-Russia interpretation, is not necessarily the BRICS interpretation. South Africa doesn't see it like this. Brazil, who lost its sovereignty completely under Lula 2.0, where it's basically being run by the Americans, essentially, because the Americans told Lula, we helped you to be free. Now you have to follow our list. It's the famous story of Jake Sullivan showing up in Brasilia before Lula got to power with the list. And Lula is following the list.
Before we go into...
Can I ask a question really quickly about that?
Yes.
What is the American role in the banning of Twitter X in Brazil? Moraes, this judge, issued a ban of Twitter X, but it was clear that Lula and his crew wanted this because they believe, Bolsonaro's influencers are having a bad political effect. but it was a clear attack on free speech and democracy. And a lot of the Brazilian experts who are talking about disinformation get sent to all of these kind of quasi-CIA forums on disinformation. So what's the US role there? I have always wanted to know more about that.
Okay, I'll give you, Max, excellent question. And if you ask this
For
question.
those of you who just don't know,
Yeah.
Twitter was completely banned for some time. Is it still banned?
Yeah, they needed to appoint a legal representative and pay a huge fine. The legal representative was reappointed, they have to pay the money, and then they'll be back to the Brazilian market. But the short answer to this excellent question, which a lot of people in Brazil who ask, they risk going to jail, direct interference from the Democrats in the US. Simple as that. Straight
It's
to
like
the
a
point.
pilot program for what Kamala wants to do in the US.
Absolutely. And Brazil is an excellent testing ground. In fact, Brazilians are very good at joking. They say that everything horrible that happened on the planet, the test lab is here first. This is another one. And something that will happen in Europe under their absolutely neo-Orwellian Digital Services Act. The same thing. So the collective West is on this path. Digital Services Act, and we control freedom of information. And even Hillary herself said that 2 or 3 days ago, if we don't control the flow of information, we cannot control the narrative. Essentially, it's what
Before
they're
we go
saying.
to closing arguments, I just want to ask Francois one question briefly.
Or Hillary,
Harris, for Russia.
Did they ask this question? You asked?
I got a better answer about other stuff.
They don't care, which is even better. It's the third way, the Russian way. These guys who are in the Russian Security Council around Putin, these are really hardcore players. It includes the head of the Foreign Intelligence, SPR, the head of FSB, Dmitry Medvedev, which is essentially the number 2 in the government, Nikolai Patrushev, who was also from the FSB in the past. These are really, really serious people. And basically, they don't, when they give interviews to Russian media, they say it in a very terse way. We don't care. We're following what we want to do. And in terms of the war, it's the same thing. We read their so-called ceasefire plans and all that. This is not what we want. We already presented what we want. And if they don't want to negotiate with us, it's simple. The answer is going to be in the battlefield, considering their war specifically. But they know that the hybrid war against the collective West, it will go on for a long time. And they know all the NATO plans for 2030, rearming NATO, and extra troops in Scandinavia and the Baltic Chihuahuas. They know everything about that, and they are not worried.
Francois, before I'm going to give closing arguments for you, but I just want to ask Francois one question. What's up with France voting for Palestinian representation state and all that? It's different from other European countries. Why do you think that is, even though we have France going more to the right than others?
No, it's not different. I mean, the process is fully stopped. The answer of Macron is, we will do it, but in circumstances which will not be interpreted as fueling or supporting terrorism.
But I saw, for instance, United Kingdom, Germany, other European countries, they
Spain,
abstain.
Ireland, Norway, but not France, not until now.
France
Not that I know.
voted for Palestine in the last 2 times.
Okay. Yeah, well, and also there is tension between Macron and Netanyahu during the last 48 hours. Yeah, it's true. It's true, but
So it's not fundamental, you're saying?
No, it's not fundamental. I'm afraid it's not.
I just want to close with one question. If anybody wants to jump in, and then we'll close the session, unless there's a quick question from the crowd. Okay, we got one question here and one question back there. We're gonna couple them together and have a final. I'll also throw my question into there, and we'll close the session. My question to the panel is about. Okay, let's start here.
Thank you very much for all of you and you welcome to the university. My question is, in the past, in history, we have seen so many wars. But, today there is a war in Ukraine, in between Ukraine and Russia. But the thing in Gaza is different thing. In a war, you can take a position in a side. Now, Western, countries are supporting Ukraine against Russia. We can understand why it is. But in Gaza, there were some values from Westerners after French Revolution. It was democracy, human rights, property rights, etc. Within this perspective, what do you think about the Western civilization for the future? Is it really seriously in decline, or the Western intellectuals, what they think, this is the peak, and now these big powers are losing something from their system, and they are doing what they can do. This is the end of history for them. There was another book. It was from different perspective, Fukuyama. Think about that book. It was the end of history for all humanity. But now we are facing with a very different picture. So this is my question, and I really would like to get your, the Western leaders are not stupid. I think they, without values, without ethics, you cannot look at the future. It's really they are losing. So it's not easy to speak about what's happening today in Gaza, but it seems we are, as human beings, we lost everybody. We first, as Muslims, our brother from Iran tried to explain something, but I am really very surprised about Iran. Really very, very surprised what they are doing. They are playing together with these big powers, I'm afraid. I really would like to, say very clearly this from recent, in Syria and then what's happening today. They are bombing something, but there is no just one accident, as I heard, a number of hundreds of bombs, but nothing happened. What kind of bomb is this towards Israel? It seems to me that Iran is also in a game with the Westerners. Unfortunately, so what is it? This is, Mullah regime. I do not know what they also want to, continue their regime, and so it's.
Thank you.
So that's my point.
Thank you. So two questions, one about Western civilizational values, and then a question directed about Iran. Max?
Well, I'm not the Iranian. And I'm not standing with Iran or any faction because I don't experience sanctions. I don't experience the suffering that average Iranians go through, and I'm not involved directly on that side. But I understand the balance of power is on the side of my country militarily, as well as Israel, which just has this endless genocide train of C-130 aircrafts, delivering it with the heaviest weapons possible, with the most advanced air force in the region. And Iran does have to play a delicate game here, which is a form of negotiation. So don't get caught up in the value judgments of the West, which judges success according to civilian injuries and casualties. That's not what Iran was trying to accomplish with this strike. It was trying to send a message. It was targeting military facilities. We even sent a reporter in Israel to the sites of the Iranian missile strikes. The Grayzone, yes, and you can see the video. He went to Nevatim Air Base. He took photos of the missiles. He went to the Mossad headquarters and showed a crater there. That's what Iran was targeting, and it was sending a message that we are actually trying to demonstrate civilizational superiority through this response, and we're sending you a message that if you do this again, it's going to intensify, but here's what we have. And you can just see the escalation. So I think it's propaganda to say that the attack failed. Iran sent its message, and now the ball is in the US and Israeli court. And then we'll see what Iran ultimately has. And to your question, has Iran failed, or are they not doing enough? Who else is doing anything in this region, really? Who's doing anything? What? I'm not going to name any names of any governments. What has anybody been doing? I mean, I'm not an Arab, so I feel like I can't really, or a Muslim, so I can't really criticize as harshly as many of you can. But it's just pretty obvious standing back that there are some pretty sold out, bought off governments, and that also governments that are heavily compromised by IMF loans and the fear of their own economies collapsing. Iran is taking a severe hit for this. And as Mohammed said, it's ideological. So I'm trying to come at this objectively, but I would think it's a very difficult position that Iran is in, and they're taking a serious risk for something that is a principle we just don't see any other country upholding, which is Palestinian liberation.
And that one point is, according to the Genocide Convention, if a country is committing genocide, it's incumbent upon every country in the world to do something about it. It's not something
And I've
that
said
is
openly,
optional.
Ansar Allah, the Houthis in Yemen, are doing what the international community should have been doing. This is a legitimate responsibility to protect intervention, and it had been largely bloodless. They are trying to avoid killing people on these on ships, just stopping the ships. It had been largely bloodless until they were sending drones into Israel, where they're unable to aim as effectively as Iran's ballistic missiles. This really exemplifies what you're talking about, which is the complete failure and hollowness of the institutions set up by the West after World War II to stop another genocide, because they're toothless. They're powerless to do anything.
I'm sorry we're running out of time, but I want to extend. I'm going to extend this discussion, so I'm going to hand it to you right afterwards. Okay.
Answering your question. The End of History was a stupid book written by a stupid neo-Hegelian, Fukuyama. Basically, he was saying the future of humanity is Western neoliberalism. I don't need to tell you anything more about that. Now it's different. Now it's, I would say, the preamble for the decline, the absolute decline of the West, which has already started. And when I say the West, I don't say Voltaire, Nietzsche, Schopenhauer, Leonardo, Botticelli, Western elites. Because Western elites in the young 21st century, as Eric Hobsbawm would say, they are supporting a genocide. And morally, they are already dead. This is the most important issue.
I want to close with a reflection, because, what we had this, conference, it's a tradition, of Muslims to have a conference, international conference in the face of injustice. And I signaled that 93 years ago, 1931, there was a World Islamic Congress that took place in Jerusalem, organized by Muhammad Ali and Haj Amin al-Husseini, who was the Mufti of Jerusalem at the time. No, it was Muhammad Ali, Muhammad and Shaukat Ali, who are the Khilafists in India. But Mohammad Iqbal came to that conference, and one of his comments centered around calling to question Muslims, because he said at the conference that, look, the enemies of Muslims, the enemies of Islam will always do what they do. But he said Muslims should hang their heads in shame. This was in 1931, about what is happening in Jerusalem. And here Muslim countries face, I feel like, a fork in the road. One vision of independence is a kind of multipolarity, in the sense that I'm going to deal with the West, I'm going to benefit from Western money and Western trade, and also I'm going to have friendship with China, and I'm also going to have friends with Russia, and I'm going to wait and see how this pans out. One time I was talking to a Turkish, what seemed to me an intelligence officer, who said on the question of India and Pakistan, on the question of Kashmir, we're balancing, between India and Pakistan. And I told to him, are you going to also balance on the question of Palestine and Israel? So my question is, that's one kind of independence, that you get to deal with everybody, and it's kind of a neoliberal market. You get to buy everything, you get to do everything. Another kind of independence is that you actually double down on principle. And that means that those people who are committing genocide, this is for Muslims now, we have to take a stand. And I want us to reflect on, is it possible for Muslim countries, those now who are not in the axis of resistance or in the axis of imperialism, who are waiting in the sidelines, who are watching which way this is going to go? Is there a luxury now that we can have what some people call a multipolar, what does multipolar diplomacy look like now? Does it mean that you can be friends with the West and also be friends with those who kill, people in Gaza, and also be friends with those who defend people in Gaza? Is this possible? Is this what independent, foreign policy looks like? I mean, just a question to the crowd. Yeah.
From maybe Max down.
Max says from that side.
Okay, start with you.
I wanna answer.
Okay, start with you, and then he ends with you.
What does it mean to be in the global south, right? I mean, what does that mean? Start with the global south.
What we've experienced under apartheid was the absolute dehumanization of the darker race. And this is what I see is happening in the world today. I think the Western world is made up of perhaps maximum 15%, the white world, if I can put it that way, that is really demonizing the rest of the 85%, controlling them. And this is how we felt under apartheid. It was regarded as a crime against humanity, simply mainly because of the dehumanization. And I think the Zionists, supported by the Western world, can do what they want to, not because of the value system that has gone down. Is it that they always had this value system where they decimated the indigenous populations in America, the native Indians, what they've done in Algeria, and so on and so forth? Perhaps we need to rethink how we view the Western world. Again, I want to come back to what Max has pointed out here very, very clearly. And this is the reason why we came here. The absolute savagery that we see now, that is being conducted 24/7 on our TV screens, has been happening for centuries, which we never saw before. And this is what disappoints me in many ways, that we still hold the value system of the West in high. I don't think existed as we see it. That's
Excellent point, by the way. I think, and it ties up with beyond mediocre leadership of a great deal of Islam. It's 57 countries, Organization of the Islamic Conference now. Who is doing anything practical? Once again, what Max said about the genocide in Gaza. Really small minority. So if the populations, well, the population of Egypt certainly would love to, population of Jordan certainly would love to, but can they effect popular regime change in Egypt and Jordan? We know it's impossible. And this ties up, of course, with the absolute savagery of the collective West as a whole. When you look individually at the political leadership in all the G7 countries and all what I call NATO stan, the NATO space, it speaks for itself. We have the European Union now basically designating their foreign policy chief for nearly 500 million people in the EU, and they choose a Russophobe idiot from Estonia. That tells you everything about the quality of political leadership in the collective West and, of course, in the Arab world and great deal of the lands of Islam. And in the Arab world is even worse because we have a genocide being perpetrated against one of the stalwarts of the lands of Islam, and they're not saying anything. I wish I could be more auspicious than, it's absolutely impossible. We have reason to be profoundly dejected because what do we have? We have what Max has, an outstanding 40-minute reportage and investigative journalism confirming everything that we already knew, but not in detail, of how this Israeli-American compound works and how it is genocidal by nature. What can we do practically about that? As analysts, as journalists, as human beings, as citizens? Nothing, in fact, except scream, but it's not enough, unfortunately. Sorry, I wish I could be more.
Do you, dear Sami, do you allow me to open a kind of civil war inside the panel? Yes? No, I want to blindly support this extraordinary document that you gave us, and I'm glad, and I've already written to friends, read it, and I'm going to post, I say, every court of France, every magistrat, every judge has to see this document before he labels, you know, Tamjid al-Irhab, who is supporting terrorism. Now I'm going to start the civil war. And I will weaken the Russian soft power. Putin does not belong to the global South. I have reasons. You told us a very nice story about the popes, you know, identifying to the Palestinians defending their land. I have another story with the same popes. High-ranking popes, they were blessing the Sukhoi loaded with bombs, which were on the verge of killing thousands of Syrians. And I found myself, you know, it was 11 years ago, I found myself, I think it was in the Emirates. I found myself, I was living in Syria. No, that's my problem, you know, I've lived there. I was seeing things, okay? So I found myself in this stupid situation of explaining what I considered was the brain, inside the brain of Putin when he was supporting Bashar al-Assad. And I said, well, you know, it's a Ukraine type analysis. I said, you know, the West, they are pushing him everywhere. So whenever he gets an opportunity to oppose the West, he does it. And in the car after the meeting, I found myself with a former advisor of President Putin, of President Yeltsin, sorry. And this guy said to me, oh, Francois, your explanation is absolutely perfect, but you lack one dimension. Putin hates Muslims. From Afghanistan to Chechen to Syria, he has a brain which is very clear. And he said it, the former advisor of Yeltsin said,
Putin said, I am fighting in Syria because I don't want to have to fight tomorrow at the border of Russia. I am fighting who? So-called Islamic State, but in fact, Muslims, okay? He was fighting Muslims. For this reason, I think that everything which has been said tonight is great and I fully support it. But beware of the idea that an alternative would be to let Putin do what he wants to do. Thank you.
Well,
Shots fired.
of course, of course, a former advisor to Yeltsin told you that. Yeltsin's the guy who sold out Russia. Yeltsin's the most hated man in the global South too.
Had a lot of people too. I am not totally innocent.
I'm
sorry, it's ridiculous.
Let's
Should have come out
continue.
before.
There's the civil war can continue because we have two more commentaries. So
I really don't think that, for me, it's not important if President Putin or the president of China is with the axis of resistance or not. The axis of resistance has to, and resistance in general, right? I mean, general, as a broader resistance. We're all a part of a broader resistance. We may not have arms, but we are resisting this genocidal regime each in our own way. I think just by sitting here, you are resisting. You came to see a piece of resistance that is not a weapon. It's not financial. It's not this particular act. You're not paying money, but you're spending your time to gain knowledge, to carry out an act of resistance. We will, I think, as people who support the resistance, at least this is my view, we will cooperate with whoever is willing to work with us up to wherever he or she is willing to work with us. If China is encouraged for its own reasons to distance itself from Israel, so much the better. If the Russians are willing to make a statement at the UN Security Council, as was pointed out, so much the better. If India can be tilted a bit away from Israel, so much the better. If Saudi Arabia can be pushed in a different direction, and this is something, by the way, that October the 7th did. This is something we have to keep in mind, that when earlier this question was raised, the resistance in Gaza wrecked this plan to integrate the region, and for the Saudi government and probably everyone else to get on the bandwagon. But the point for me is that as a person who believes in resistance, we have our own responsibilities. And we cannot simply say that since someone else, I don't believe he's sincere or she's sincere, therefore I'm no longer obliged to take steps. We are all responsible. This is not a good thing to do. You are responsible. You have a responsibility to support the Palestinian people in any way or form. I personally think that the biggest loser in all this is the West, because the West has destroyed its reputation and credibility that you were alluding to earlier on for the sake of Israel. I don't think anyone can ever take Israel, the West, the collective West, as often said in Russian media. Sometimes they tell me you're using a Russian phrase. I didn't know that, but the collective West has been exposed. So now, at least as students, you should use this opportunity to weaken their narrative further and strengthen the narrative of the resistance. I've never been to India. I have some Indian friends. I'm not going to comment about India because just like yesterday, someone asked me about something on Turkey. I said, well, we have Turks here. You should ask them. It's like Iran all the time. You hear about Iran, but there's never Iranians. Only the Iranians who they choose to talk about Iran are on television. And every once in a while they invite me and everyone's attacking me from all sides, and they don't let me talk. So I can't comment about India that much, but from what I'm hearing, the sheer amount of material that exists online now about the daily genocide is having an impact on India. So we have a responsibility to just keep pushing. I've heard skepticism, pessimism. I'm not pessimistic, and I'm optimistic about the future. But it's going to be very tough. And actually, I think that one of the reasons why the world has turned against the West is because the scenes that we're seeing in Gaza resonate in the minds of people across the global South who had heard about what happened to South Asia, who had heard about what happened in Latin America, and this is not just Muslims, who had heard what happened in their continent, whether in Latin America or Africa or parts of Asia in the 18th century, 19th century, what the colonialists did to their people. They're seeing it happen live. And so it resonates. It's this is what I read at school, 2-3 pages in that history book of mine, let's say in the 9th grade or 10th grade. This is the same thing. So while the massacre itself is horrific and it can be depressing, I'm no doubt. I gave the example yesterday. I went to Beirut 3-4 days ago to Dahia in southern Beirut, and there was a place where it had just been bombed. And there were 5 towers there, I was told. I couldn't tell because it was just and there was smoke rising, and we went there, and I was thinking right now, maybe there are kids underneath here who are screaming for help, and I can't do anything about it. I couldn't hear anything. I was just thinking that way. So it can be discouraging at times when you feel helpless, and we may feel helpless, but resistance is resistance. You have to speak out. You have to boycott. You have to do what it is you have to do. If you do what's right, it doesn't matter if you win or lose. If you do what's right, it doesn't matter what the end of this is. But I believe that the world is changing. I'm not saying that the United States is a diminished power, but I believe that the world is changing. And we have to push to make sure that that change that's taking place benefits the people of Gaza today. And you may think, well, what can I do? That's what I always have, I've been saying to myself all my life, but you just do what you have to do. So I think I'm against any sense of discouragement and depression. You have too much work to do, and there's no time to be depressed or discouraged. You just don't have that luxury.
Yeah, thank you.
Max, we're going to close with you.
Well, no, we're going to close with Dr. Sami, but I'll try not to wade into anything too provocative, but I feel like Francois's comments need to be addressed on some level. And, my views on Syria, Russia, everything is public, and you all might not agree with them. I think we all agree on Palestine, and that Palestine should be the center of our conversation and be at the center of our consciousness right now. My source on Syria was a little different than an advisor to Boris Yeltsin, who was controlled by the United States to loot Russia's economy and is one of the most hated men in Russia. My sources were in Syria, and I used to think that way about what happened in Syria. I got to go to Damascus and the areas around there in 2018. One of my hosts and friends there was someone who sponsored the early protests, calling for a reform of the Assad government and the economy that was substantially controlled by a cartel that was not giving opportunities. And he said this turned into a militarized situation in which people were coming in from out of the country, and I could no longer support it because it wasn't about reform or even removing a president or ending corruption. It was about destroying the whole state on behalf of very powerful foreign powers. There was a imam whose grave I visited right next to the grave of Saladin in Damascus's old city, who warned in 2011 that we are being victimized by Western and outside conspiracies, and it will destroy our society and harm Muslims and Christians and everyone in Syria. Al-Bouti, and he was shot while preaching the Quran in his mosque. There was a bombing and then he was shot with the Quran in his hand. Who do you think? Putin? Well, I think he's been proven right. I wandered out of the old city, which was under siege for years, a center of civilization, of the diversity of the Arab world. And I went into East Ghouta, which was completely destroyed. It looked like Gaza. And I started talking to average people, Muslims, Sunni Muslims in East Ghouta, who told me how they initially supported Jaish al-Islam coming into their neighborhood because they opposed the Assad government, because they were Islamic and not Alawite, and they were abused, aid was stolen, they were tortured, and that Jaish al-Islam set up what they called a miniature Saudi Arabia because they were sponsored by Saudi Arabia, which was in league with Israel, trying to destroy the Syrian state. And they were glad that this whole nightmare was simply over. I also went north to Malula, where the Aramaic language is still spoken. I think it's the only place on earth where Aramaic is still spoken and where people who speak it live alongside Muslims in their own community. And the nuns there were kidnapped by Al-Qaeda bandits who were sponsored by the Gulf states. And it was only after the intervention of Hezbollah that this village was liberated and was able to maintain its culture, which is the culture of the Arab world. So it's a little bit more complicated than that when we talk about who is intervening in Syria and what their agenda was. And now we can see who's attacking Syria. It's Israel and the West attacking Syria hundreds and hundreds of times. And who's celebrating the killing of Hassan Nasrallah? Who's celebrating the attacks on the resistance? What side are they on? Zionism isn't only for Jews. So I think it's a time now to get over all of the old divisions. We were divided inside the US in the anti-war movement. Muslims were divided in the West over this. Arabs were divided. And it was very convenient for Israel and the US and the imperial forces. And when I say the US, I mean US elites who are acting against our interests in the US. And now is a time for unity. Now is a time to get over this and start acting in the interest of Palestine, because a revolution is taking place, a real revolution, and real suffering is taking place. So I hope we can get there. And this isn't just a message for you, it's a message for anyone watching outside who is confused or felt divided, to get over these petty differences. It's very clear what the struggle is about right now.
I just want to thank everybody for being part of this panel and for the audience to stay 3 hours or even over 3 hours. I just want to put something on the record because people were criticizing correctly, rightly, that we didn't have any female scholars in this conference. And it wasn't for the lack of trying. I tried, but I got 4 declines and I ran out of time. Usually in our conferences, we do have a good representation of that. This is the first time that
I hope it wasn't me.
No, no, not at all. Not at all. I mean, I did have some invitations, but I apologize for that. For Oasis' question about the global South and the future, I think and with this discussion that we just listened to, I think it's very important to know that there are distractions when you're trying to focus on the real threat. The real threat right now is Western hegemony. And if there are some great powers that have the same strategy or the same objectives as you are, then there is a common cause. to be considered here. Yes, Putin is not save it all. I mean, he's not gonna fight on behalf of this region, but certainly within BRICS, within Russia, within China, within other powers who are standing up to American hegemony, who are taking courageous stance, as I pointed out in the United Nations when it came to the Security Council. For example, the Russian ambassador, if you had listened to the arguments he was making and to the stance he was taking, certainly it was much stronger than other countries, particularly even Arab countries. Yeah, I know. But I mean, it's not, I don't expect Russia to come and fight for Palestine, but taking stance and particularly in an international forum is very important. But more importantly, taking stance against the Western hegemony, because we have to realize one thing. As Pepe pointed out, we had 57 Muslim countries meeting on November 11th, and they couldn't agree on any single resolution that could actually make a difference against genocide. The only thing they came out with was to provide humanitarian aid to Palestinians. Even that was not delivered, even though they tried. I mean, Turkey is probably the country that aided the most, but they couldn't enter. I mean, they couldn't get one bottle of water to a thirsty Palestinian child without Netanyahu saying so. That tells you about the state of weakness, which means that now answering the question about what should we do, and I think we need to realize that the real problem here is Western influence, is foreign influence in this region. Many of these countries are not able to do anything because of that situation. In the conference, I gave a whole presentation about this. I'm not about to repeat it here. But it is very important to understand the real problem. Zionist influence, foreign influence, is the biggest impediment to any kind of progress in this region, to any kind of, and that's what resistance is all about. When we say resistance, that's what we're talking about. How we, as an individual, as a community, as a country, as a nation, try to get rid of foreign influence in all aspects of our lives, starting from the dominance, from the military, and so on and so forth, all the way down to culture and others. So this is what the fight is about. Palestinians are at the front line at the beginning of this onslaught, of this hegemony, of this trying to overcome. If it wasn't for the resistance, this whole region would be taken over, and we would not even be able to see what the future is. And I think it is a testament to one of the most important consequence and I would say achievements of Tufan al-Aqsa, despite all the sacrifices that we've seen, which is to put a line in the sand that we're not going to succumb to this Western hegemony. When Netanyahu stood before the United Nations 2 weeks before Tufan al-Aqsa on September 22nd, holding this map, drawing this line, boasting about, you know, in a Hebrew way, boasting about Israel. That's what he was talking about, that Israel now is going to be the hegemon in this region. Israel is going to control and dictate, and everyone is going to follow its lead. That's what he was talking about. Tufan al-Aqsa stopped this and actually brought it down to earth, that you're not going to be the hegemon. You are going to actually be put in your place. And that's what this is about. And that's why they lashed out with a genocide. So for the people of the region, they need to realize who the real enemy is. We're going through all kinds of distractions. I mean, that's what it is. It is a distraction to start looking at other countries and other faiths and other sects as being the enemy. This is not the case. And I continue saying our problem is not with Judaism. This is very important to say it over and over and over again. And a Zionist is not a Jew. A Zionist is anyone who believes that Israel or the Zionists or the Jewish community will have sovereign right in Palestine. That could be a Jew, a Christian, a Muslim, a Hindu, a Buddhist, or with no religion. And we could have common causes with all people of different faiths and different religions who refuse this supremacist view of the world, that there are some people who will have the right to dominate others regardless of their faith. That's what the fight is about. So let's not go into the details that actually distract us. And when we look at this fight, then we should be able always to identify who the real enemy is. What happened in Syria and what happened in Yemen and what happened in Iraq and what happened in Sudan and what happens in Somalia and what happens in, across the region. These are all indications of that there are real enemies who are trying to introduce these fights, whether based on ethnicity, sectarian differences and others, in order to distract from the real enemy. And the real enemy here is to keep this region fragmented, divided, weak, and unable actually to start any kind of a revival project. And whether we like it or not, Zionist and the Zionist state is at the heart of it. And therefore, our real strategy should be, our real mission should be to change this, and to change this by fighting and resisting. And I believe that the dismantlement of the Zionist structures, I'm not talking about killing any person or throwing people in the sea, but dismantling Zionist, racist, supremacist, expansionist, aggressive structures. That's what the fight is about. The same thing as our brothers and sisters did in South Africa. It wasn't about white or black. It was about dismantling an apartheid system that had one people dominating other people. That's what the fight, that's the heart of the fight. And to do this, everyone in their communities, in Turkey, in Malaysia, in Pakistan, in Europe, in America, everywhere else, wherever you see that there is a Zionist influence and supporters of Zionism, that is your mission, to weaken them, to expose them. That's what Max has been trying to do for now decades. And that's what everybody should be trying to do, to expose these people, because these people have an agenda, and that agenda is to dominate the South, to dominate colored people, to dominate the region, and to make sure that their interest would be the interest that can carry the day, despite being an oppressive system and oppressive structure. So let me turn it over. We do have some mementos that we'd like to give our guests. You can, all right, great, excellent.
I'll call them one by one if we
Very
can
well.
have.
I just want to thank everybody.
Okay, go ahead. I'll begin with Max. This is Dr. Sami, if you could hand these out. Professor Marandi.